Welcome to season 2 of the Happy Sensory Corner podcast. We want to help everyone, especially when they are vulnerable, like children with special needs, to feel happier, to feel confident, calmer, so that they can be their true selves and we can all journey together through life more comfortably. And so, to do that, we train families and professionals to boost brain development with sensory enrichment games. And so we're experts in boosting brain development, but we're not experts in everything. For example, we're not experts in education, job training, advocacy, physical activity, what you eat, travel, caregiver support. And so today I'm really excited to welcome on our podcast John Brink. Now, John, I tried to make this bio as short as possible, but so many things. You've had such a full life. And you know what? I'm going to change my mind just a little bit. Instead of reading the bio and introduce you, why don't you just get us started with how, because you were born in 1940 in Holland. Tell us about your journey.
Okay, so that sounds good, Kim, and glad to be on your show, Kim and Claudia. Claudia, so I was born in 1940, November the 1st, 1940, and just for our listeners, in particular the younger ones, that Holland was invaded by the German army in about April of 1940. And for the next 5 years, it was what we now know the Second World War. So we were living under a dictator by the name of Adolf Hitler. So my parents were married in 1938. They were in love. They loved what they were doing. They were very excited, very quickly had the first child, a boy. The following year, they had a girl. And then I came along. And then then everything was beautiful, and then the invasion happened. My dad was called into the Dutch army in April of 1940, and the last they heard from him was that he was seen in Rotterdam before the whole downtown of this big city of about 1 million people was bombed. And so they would not know for 5 years if he had survived it or not. So my mom was on her own, trying to make her way through the war with then initially two little children, and then I came along in November. And so it was a very, very difficult time for them. As a little child, I remember, from the time I was 3.5, 4 years old, the Allied bombers that were then bombing Germany and all the factories that were there. I can still remember hundreds, 300, 400 planes in the air, bombers. The sound of that is still with me today. I still remember it. And my mother would take us outside, usually in the middle of, in the nights when it was dark, looking in the distance, we saw cities burning in Germany. The reason that she took us outside, it was safer outside than inside. So that's how I grew up. The next thing that I remember is the hunger winter of 1944-45, where there was no more food. The food was cut off, and it was the coldest winter on record in Holland. With my brother, my sister, then was about 4.5 years old. We would go every morning, we would go with gunny sacks into the railroad yards, pick up anything edible and burnable. Very difficult. And then in April the 12th, 1945, we were liberated by the Canadian Army. That made such an impression on me as a nearly 5-year-old that I always knew from that point forward I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. So when after the war, PTSD, seeing far too much we should not have seen, still became part of my life, still is today, the memories of the war years. The other part remained in my life is that the dream of going to Canada. And so my schooling was not a success story. And I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times, where they said, advised my parents, and they were beautiful people. They said, maybe we have to send them to a mentally challenged school. Well, they said, no, we're not going to do that. We'll change them a trade. And so my dad was in the lumber and had been in the lumber. My grandfather was a master carpenter. So they said, let's make him a furniture maker. So at 13 years old, I left school, wanted to become a laborer or a furniture maker. And at 13. And so I really loved it, actually, hands-on. And, you know, and nights I would go to college and become a qualified furniture maker. The next thing that happened to me, I was called into the Army, Air Force in my case, in Holland, and was mandatory for 2 years. When I was 17, I went to the Air Force for more than 2 years. And then, but the dream of going to Canada was still very, very much with me. And so what happens, kids sometimes seem to be hard on each other. So the friends that I had when I was in grade 7 that went on to college and university, I became a laborer and I was kind of looked down on. So I was troubled by that in a sense. And I always wanted to prove to me that I was equally able as they were in being successful. But school was not something that worked well for me. And so I was already successful after I came out of the Air Force to work in one of the larger lumber companies in Holland. But still the dream of going to Canada, studying on my own, was still very much present. In July of 1965, I decided to go to Canada, start with nothing. I had a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and some money. And I knew I wanted to go to the west coast of Canada, British Columbia, where there's all the trees, and build my own lumber mill. And so when I came off the airplane in Montreal, I took the train across Canada, 4 days, 5 nights. My God, that's a long way to go. And so when I came off the train in Vancouver, I went to the immigration office there, and I could speak no English. I didn't know a soul. I didn't have a job. And fortunately, there was a German fellow, and I could speak some German. I told him what I wanted to do. I wanted to build a lumber mill. He said, go to Prince George in BC. Now, for those people watching, is that they say, we know Canada, we know BC, we know Vancouver, where is in Prince George? Well, it's about 500 miles or 800 kilometers north of Vancouver, right in the middle of BC, northwest, east to south.
It's pretty close to Alaska, isn't it?
Well, it's still a long way away because it's about to the Yukon Territory would be another 800 kilometers alone. So it's in the middle of the province, but relatively speaking, it's relatively close to Alaska. So I came off the bus here and in Prince George 60 years ago in July of 1965 with my suitcase, my 3 books, my 2 sets of clothes, and I counted my money at least 3 times. I had exactly $25.47. And I could speak language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job. But what I had lots of is that attitude, is that no matter what happens, even then already, I always would look at tomorrow as being more positive. Passion, whatever I did, even then in Holland as a young boy, whatever I did, I gave it 125%. And then the other one was work ethic. I work harder than anybody. And so what follows, attitude, passion, work ethic, what follows is success. And so I started from the bottom up as a cleanup man, and then very quickly rose to become a supervisor, And then already very quickly, I invested in a little sawmill north of Prince George, actually in the Yukon Territory, which is right, as you said earlier, right next to Alaska. And I was there for 5 years and was part owner already after I was here only for 2 years. It took me another number of years in the Yukon, and I owned property, a mill, part owner of a mill. I had a motel, but still, I wanted to start something altogether on my own. So I went back to Prince George, and then started again becoming a supervisor and then a manager in one of the bigger mills here, and then started my own company in 1975. In July of 19, after I was here for 10 years. That is the Brink Group of companies, still in existence today. I'm the sole owner. We have lumber mills, 3 different mills in different areas. Then at the same time, I'm a very active speaker, keynote speaker in demand. I write books and do a whole lot of other things. But initially, when I started
Yeah.
from the bottom up, was a challenge.
Yeah, I think you haven't reached half of everything that we could talk about that's happened, that you've made happen in your life. But I feel like now would be a good time to introduce this idea. At what point, because you shared with us that you'd been, diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia, at what point do you think um were you aware that your brain was working differently and sort of driving you to do all those things?
I always knew, Kim, that I was just as smart as the other people. I just didn't fit in the traditional learning system. And so here, although people already said to me, "Oh, you're so successful in all of it," I didn't feel that way. And so then by pure coincidence in 1997, January 1997, I walked into a store here and I picked up a book, Driven to Distraction, written by Dr. Halliwell in 1993. I picked up the book January 1997 and, Driven to Distraction. And I don't know why I picked up the book, but it was all about ADHD. And I wrote in the book actually in Dutch because I was ashamed of it. Now I finally know who I am.
What it's interesting because you also said, I always knew I was as smart as the other guys. And you were bullied a little bit and looked down when you were a kid. But you also have this part of you that says you were a little bit ashamed about it. So when, so now we've got parents of children with ADHD listening. What advice would you give them to sort of emphasize, you are as smart as the other kid. You just don't fit the mold, and it's their fault for not having a mold that you can fit in. Is this the kind of language you would use? How would you talk to a parent like this?
But I would say to parents, the sooner you can diagnose or find that the child has the benefit, I call it, of ADHD, then talk to them about it at a appropriate age, obviously. But do not allow it to become looked at as a distraction or a liability. Expose them to others that with it have not only become successful, but far beyond what we view as success. And in fact, most of the most successful people in the world, and I can name off a list, but it's all available to anybody that wants to see it, are ADHD. And so, in fact, with Dr. Halliwell, I have a podcasting series that I do on the Brink with John A. Brink. Podcast number 203 is an interview actually that I did with Dr. Halliwell, and who is probably globally recognized as one of the authorities. He's a medical doctor, has dyslexia, wrote about 18 books in his ADHD. So, it was interesting for me. I bought his book in January 1997, and it was earlier this year that I did an interview with him. And we discussed it in terms of frequency of occurrence. I thought initially that it was around 8% of the population. Then the more I found out about it in terms of ADHD, I believed more that was higher than that. So when my interview with Dr. Helliwell, I said it, in my opinion, he's the expert, not me, that I thought it would be over or at least 20%. He said, no, John, it's over 25%. And I agree with him. And then the other part that I found remarkable is that from my experience, I suggested to him is that I believe successful, and the operative is successful entrepreneurs and CEOs. I believe 50% of them at least are ADHD. He said, no, John, at least 75%. And I agree with him. And so the point that I'm making is simply this, is that at no time allow it to be a liability. It isn't, or a distraction. It isn't. It is, in a lot of cases, a benefit. Like even during my schooling years, I was a very good writer, but not a good reader or a listener. And I was also very good at numbers. And so what I, again, coming back to your question, Kim, is that I say first and foremost, diagnose and then give them confidence that it is not a liability. In fact, a lot of people, including me, would argue that I could not have done what I've done, and I'm still a work in progress. I'm still growing on all the different things that I do, that in fact, it is a benefit. And I would call it anywhere, anytime, a superpower. But the first part of it is understanding it. Unfortunately, although things are changing, our educational system is still trying to get, and they're starting to make headways, but to remove the stigma, the understanding, and to reorganize the how do we interact with the individuals that have ADHD or are slow learners. So the other part that I did, I wrote a book about it, ADHD Unlocked.
By John A. Brink. Yeah.
And it's very, very popular. And so one of the things that was interesting in this book is that at one point, I should tell you a little story quickly. I was sitting on a plane and flying from Prince George to Victoria. We have a place there. And so I was sitting on the one flight, and between Vancouver and Victoria, my overseas flight, 12 minutes actually. And so, and the fellow next to me said, I don't know if you remember me. I'm, I met you about a year ago. You were working on a book. Against all odds, I was working on then. And I said, yeah, I did. Yeah. And I said, no, I don't remember you. He said, well, my name is Tom Romer, actually Dr. Tom Romer. He was the Vice President Academic, British Columbia's Institute of Technology. And I said, right. I said, well, I'm working now in another book, and it's about, I call it ADHD Unlocked. And he said, that is interesting because we at BCIT are looking at changing the learning or the educational system and looking at how can we focus on ADHD or slow learners and the approach they took to it is micro-certification. And what is micro-certification? It is rather than sitting in a classroom for 3 years, studying all kinds of things that are no benefit or interest to you, and then only 6 months of it really focus on the actual skill set you're trying to learn somebody. And what that would do for the ADHD mind, the ADHD mind is very effective as long as it becomes the passion to the persons that are learning it. And so micro-certification is becoming wider and wider recognized. And so hence, with Dr. Tom Bromer, I told him it's my book. This book is nearly finished. I said, the problem that I'm having, Tom, then the following week again, by pure coincidence, he was again in the same small flight. He was sitting in 1A, I was sitting in 5A, and I called him all the way over the place. I said, Tom, you have to stop at the gate because I need to talk to you. And all the people said, what's going on here? Anyway, so I talked to him, and I said to him that my book is nearly finished. I need to talk to him about micro certification, and I want him to write a piece in my book around that. And so he did. And so that is the book on ADHD,
In your life, you spent a lot of time advocating and trying to make some changes in education.
Correct.
Is micro commitment the best? Tell us about what is the most fun you've had in education besides leaving school. I have a feeling that there's a sense of relief. Actually, how did you feel about leaving school? Was this a relief or an adding to?
I like what you're doing here, Ken, because I get that question asked all the time. And I say, I feel even now still terrible about it. Absolutely terrible. Why? I should have left earlier. Somewhat tongue in cheek a little bit, obviously. But so what I'm saying is simply this, is that if it would have been, and I'm not blaming the system, even not still today, but the facts are that more than, as Dr. Halliwell says, who's one of the experts, at least 25% of individuals around the world ADHD. I believe it is probably close to 30%, 1 in 3 people. And so my book here, I suggest that not only for ADHD, but for everybody to read it, not only my book, but other books, there's lots of books and flowing around, is because you will not avoid interacting with people with ADHD, either in your family, in your friends, in your workplace, or in the world, period. And so it helps you to understand them. They are different, not in a bad way, but they intend to think different and approach issues different. And so it's very interesting to get to know them. In fact, we advertised, I think it was last year or so, for the manager of one of the companies that I have. I have a number, about 10 different companies, and for a manager person. So we advertised in Canada on the skill sets that we required for the job that we wanted to. And then we added to ADHD is considered to be an asset.
Do you find that there's out of the 5 senses and movement, do you find that one of them will soothe you and one of them will excite you? Do you find yourself drawn to certain things or experiences?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Cam and Claudie, is that now you have to realize in a way that I picked up Dr. Halliwell's book in 1997. And then 5 years later, I went to my doc's office because I was ashamed of ADHD. And my doc, that was a personal friend and delivered our 2 daughters. And he said to me, "Hey, John, why are you here?" I said, "I think I got ADHD." So I did. So the point that I'm making is this one, is that I know, looking back from my perspective, I could not have done what I did so far, being successful in my companies, being at peace with who I am, and then kind of looking back, all the challenges, the self-confidence that took me a time to get to that point, even into my 60s, until I realized fully, who am I? And so it brings us back to the children that we are talking about, the young people, is saying to the parents and everybody around them, do not make it a liability. Do not look at it as a distraction. It is, in a lot of cases, a benefit. It just means that first and foremost, give them comfort, or to saying, you are not specially in the wrong way, you're special in other ways, and show them examples. Like, I'm doing a presentation in Alberta, on Calgary, and that is on the organization. What is the organization again?
ADHD Association of Alberta.
Yeah, ADHD Association of Alberta. It's in September. And again, and I do that in numerous locations where I'm being sought out for speaking in particular about ADHD, my experience around it. And what is important for me, over and over and over, I say, it is not a bad thing. It's not a liability. Look at it in terms of, how can we make this work for you, and then give you confidence that you're equal to others, and that a lot of people that are successful because of it, not in a negative sense.
In spite of it, yeah.
In spite of it, yeah.
Did your ADHD drive you into I want to talk about your bodybuilding career.
Right.
Because I saw the picture of you. How old were you on this picture where you're just posing and flexing?
That's how I am today. So that's I have another one that I do. It's on YouTube and all over, that we did last week when we released this book, and did another one. That's how I look today, so this picture was a couple of years ago when I was competing, but I still will look exactly like this. and other pictures inside. So that is me. I'm fit, healthy, and I believe that, but it says on the book, how to thrive in your mid-80s. So I look, if somebody looks at me and saying, wow, at any age, and then if I'm in my mid-80s, then it say, how, my goodness, how do you do it? So I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America. How did it all happen is that it's part of ADHD, if you wish. At some point, I was no different than everybody else, like at the end of the year, I make commitments. I'm going to do this, that, and I'm going to buy a membership to the gym. And then 2 weeks later, I can find 100 reasons why I'm too busy to go to the gym. But then I had a case of diverticulitis that nearly killed me. I want to explain the difficulty, the diagnosis of it, but I needed an operation. I was very close, and I knew I had to look after my physical health and mental health, obviously, as well. But so for my diet and exercise was becoming very important. So I was got myself a trainer, went to the gym, and then gave in a very serious way. 6 years after I started in 2009, somebody said, "Hey, John, have you ever thought about competing?" I said, "Me? Really?" And so I did. And so I became second in the province of British Columbia, bodybuilding and physique, that qualified me for the nationals and the Arnolds. Then what happened is, COVID came. And now I'm training again. I will be 84 in November for 2025, and I'm 85, again going to the Arnolds. Your question, Cam, as to why did I do that? Well, because critical to me is fitness, because longevity, that's what the book is all about. It is about longevity and staying fit, healthy, mentally, physically, and other things. What does ADHD give me? Once I see something and I have this passion for it, which I do, I love to go to the gym. And for a lot of people, it's hard work. For me, it isn't, because I know it is so critically important. And then diet, I'm very serious about diet. And all of that allows me to keep working as I do now, very, very hard, still building my company. So I believe that ADHD has given me the ability to, once I start something, I give it my passion and all that I got. And that is substantially because of ADHD.
You've used the word passion a lot in the last, during our conversation. And it feels to me like passion is sort of a nice way to describe ADHD when it's channeled. What advice would you give a parent on how to find that topic, that object of desire that is going to grab that undivided attention of that person and ignite that passion and send them on a path of creating 10 companies and being the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America?
Well, come see me in Alberta for one, but the other one is read my books and then look at YouTube. And what you see now, you meaning everybody, including younger people, is that, that I say ADHD, ADD, whatever you want to call it, is not a liability. It makes you different, and in a lot of ways, it makes you special. Most of the people that, and what I said earlier, Dr. Halliwell, his podcast is with me is 203 and is available. Very interesting podcast, and that, but fortunately has happened. The stigma is slowly disappearing. That ADHD is more and more accepted as frequency of occurrence, at least I would say 25 to 30% of the population around the world. And me speaking about it or introducing it in presentations that I do, and I do many of them, and writing about it takes away, I hope, the stigma of it that it is a liability. It isn't. The sooner you interact with your young persons, so I have to tell you this one little thing about this book. So I was doing a presentation here west of Prince George in a town called Smithers, west of us, and not about this, but about other things. And so when I was having dinner in the hotel, an older man came to me and he said, once you finish your dinner, I'm sitting there at the other, can I talk to you? I said, sure. And so after I finished my dinner, I went over to him and he said to me, I have a son that is 15 years old, and he has been struggling immensely with the thought of ADHD, and he was diagnosed and he's struggling with it. So he said, him and me read your book together. And I had sent him a free copy of the book because he was a counselor of one of the city's government. And so I send them copies of my book. So, and those are things that happen to me all the time. I talk to people and saying, that more and more people are speaking about it. I have been very proactive about it and saying, no, it can be, and it is, in my mind, a superpower. Everything is possible, but the first thing you want to make sure that the child, the young person, doesn't feel it's a liability. And the frequency of occurrence I found in my experience, it's not only with boys, but it's likely equal between boys and girls. Girls seem to present it differently than guys, so, but I believe the frequency is pretty much the same.
Hey, John, switch gears just a second. And I think it'd be a nice way to maybe wrap up the episode is, ADHD, superpower, passion when it's properly channeled. What do you like? Is there something about ADHD that is making your life just a little bit difficult?
Oh my goodness.
Besides not being able to say no, it feels like.
Yeah, I don't know, never, it took me till I was 62 that I was diagnosed. So from the time I was 13, when I left school and was looked at like labor. I'm proud of that now. And I was looked at as dumb, stupid, and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. It took for me 50 years till the time I was 62 and walked into my doc's office and said, I think I got ADHD. And so we looked at it and then did the diagnosis. I find that to be extremely unfortunate that it didn't affect me, because after I was 62, I became very active. I'm and working on my fifth and sixth book as an author, being very successful in my companies that I own, and then being a very active podcaster, being an in-demand speaker, and a good one. And so all of that I could do because I discovered ADHD, and that gave me confidence. The most important part is that for the longest time, and we have a limited amount of time, even when I already was successful here in business, I did not have confidence in me. And so by knowing and finding out about it, that I was okay, and in a lot of cases beyond okay because of ADHD, so I find it, there are no liabilities for me other than if I took you to my office, it looks like a bomb hit it. I have a terrible time organizing. And I wish I was more effective in it than I am, but it is what it is. And so I have an office here in Prince George, and another one in Vancouver, another one in Victoria. And the one in Victoria is very, very neat and very, very tidy. The one here is a bit of a disaster, but I get a lot of stuff done, and I get up at 5:30 in the morning. I always make my bed, and I always think I'm late. And then by the time I get home, even now, by the time I get home, it's probably around 7 o'clock. So I work about 12 hours a day, and and I'm a go-go guy.
It was awesome listening to your experience, and I know that the parents are going to be encouraged to listen to your story. Thank you for being a beacon of hope, John. Good luck at the AAA conference, and to everybody who's listening, we'll see you guys next week on our next episode.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Cloudy. Nice to talk to you, and nice having me. Thank you.